I still recall that evening as if it were merely yesterday. Although 6 months have passed, the memory lingers vividly, the scent of the air, the warmth of his skin, and the way everything transformed between us with such ease yet profound intensity. I had never anticipated this shift. I never imagined my life would be marked by a division of before and after, but it undeniably was. This change began when our parents departed for the weekend. Ron and I were accustomed to being alone together, having spent our entire lives side by side, growing up, sharing meals, bickering over trivial matters, and later laughing about them. He was not my brother by blood, yet he was the closest person to me in the world, or at least that was my belief. That night, the atmosphere in the house felt different, quieter. The absence of our parents was not unfamiliar, but the way we experienced their absence was. Ron, being 2 years my senior, had always treated me as an equal, never condescending or viewing me as a child. This dynamic made it easy to trust him when he produced a bottle of whiskey. "You've never been drunk before, have you?" he inquired, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. I hesitated, responding with a no, to which he smirked and said, "Then I suppose tonight is the night." I rolled my eyes, yet when he slid a shot glass toward me, I did not decline. Ron had a unique ability to make everything seem effortless, as if nothing were a significant issue. This quality rendered him magnetic, his quiet confidence, his effortless charm, and the way he carried himself as though he possessed all the answers. I aspired to embody that same ease, to grasp what it felt like, so I took my first sip. It burned, but I swallowed it down, observing how he tipped his head back with such ease, the movement of his throat as he drank. He caught my gaze and grinned, teasing, "Smooth, huh?" I coughed in response, "Yeah, totally." We continued to drink, the bottle gradually depleting between us. The atmosphere in the room shifted, not in a manner I could articulate, but in a way I could deeply sense. The closeness that had always existed between us evolved into something different, something heavier, something unspoken. We migrated to the couch, the television flickering in the background. In the background, a soft hum lingered, and I found myself enveloped in warmth, not solely from the alcohol, but also from Ron's presence beside me. His arm rested casually along the back of the couch, his fingers occasionally brushing against my shoulder. He had always been at ease with physical contact, comfortable in his own skin, yet this moment felt distinct, or perhaps I had changed. Our eyes locked, and his smirk softened as he asked, "You good?" I nodded, swallowing hard, and replied, "Yeah." His fingers traced the edge of his glass as he observed me intently. "You seem different," he remarked. I frowned, questioning how he perceived me. His dark eyes flickered in the dim light, and he continued, "You're just looking at me differently." My breath caught in my throat. Was I? I had not recognized it until he voiced it, until I felt the weight of his gaze holding mine, steady and inscrutable. I could have laughed it off, made a joke to deflect the tension, but I chose not to, and neither did he. The silence between us thickened, laden with an unspoken understanding that neither of us dared to disrupt. Gradually, Ron set his drink aside and turned fully toward me, his knee brushing against mine. His hand found its way to my jaw, his touch light yet purposeful. In that fleeting moment, I realized this was not merely the influence of alcohol, it was something deeper, a curiosity that had long been waiting for the right moment to emerge. When he leaned in, I did not pull away. As our lips met, I reciprocated the kiss. The instant our mouths connected, the world around us faded away. I could not discern whether it was the alcohol or an underlying tension that had finally surfaced, but once it did, there was no turning back. Ron's hand on my jaw was firm, anchoring me even as everything within me turned upside down. His lips were warm, softer than I had anticipated, yet there was nothing tentative about his kiss. It began slowly, deliberately, as if he were gauging the significance of the moment. But when I parted my lips slightly, everything shifted. His grip tightened, his body leaning into mine, pressing me back against the couch. My pulse raced, and my hands clutched his arms, feeling the heat radiating between us. The sensation of his skin was palpable through the delicate fabric of his t-shirt. Neither of us was inclined to halt. I had never experienced a kiss like this before, nothing quite like it. Our breaths intertwined, his scent, a subtle blend of cologne and whiskey, was unmistakably his, drawing me further into a dreamy state. My fingers found their way to the back of his neck, pulling him closer, driven by an instinct I could not fully comprehend, yet I was resolute in my desire for him to continue. Ron exhaled sharply, his hand gliding down, fingers grazing my throat and collarbone before pausing just at the hem of my shirt. His thumb began to trace languid circles against my skin, a gentle caress that ignited a rush of warmth within me. I gasped against his lips, and that sound seemed to stir something within him. He let out a soft groan, his body shifting to press even closer. His hand slipped beneath my shirt, his palm resting against my chest, causing my breath to hitch. I became acutely aware of the rapid beating of my heart, especially when he smirked against my lips, murmuring about my pulse as his thumb brushed over the quickened rhythm. I swallowed hard, tightening my grip on his arms. He pulled back slightly to meet my gaze, his dark eyes searching mine, holding an unspoken question, a moment of hesitation, a choice. Yet, I remained still, unwilling to move. His hand lingered beneath my shirt, his fingers warm against my skin, and his presence was so close that it sent waves of heat coursing through my body. The air between us had shifted, becoming heavier, charged with unexpressed feelings. Ron exhaled, his breath steady yet deep, his fingers pressing lightly at my waist before pausing, a moment of mutual understanding. I swallowed again, my chest rising and falling beneath his touch. I knew that if I spoke, my voice would tremble, so instead, I reached for him. His breath caught for a brief moment, but then he drew nearer, his hands gripping my waist, his body aligning with mine in a way that felt like an answer we had both been hesitant to acknowledge until now. We were no longer questioning or hesitating, we were simply surrendering, and for the first time, it felt liberating. I felt no fear in that moment. We ought not to have engaged in this, yet we did. Once that boundary was crossed, there was no turning back. Ron's grip was firm and steady, as if he were holding on to something equally delicate and undeniable. It felt as though, should he release his hold, reality would rush in too swiftly. This was not merely a transient moment, it transcended curiosity. It was something genuine, something we had never articulated, yet had always sensed was present. I could perceive it in the way he embraced me, as if he had been anticipating this moment, as if a part of him had recognized its inevitability. His arm remained around my back, his breath lingered close to my skin, and he whispered my name so softly that I could barely catch it. We were transgressing a boundary that had long existed between us, a boundary that had kept us aligned with what was deemed acceptable. Brothers not by blood, but by family, by life, by everything that should have rendered this impossible. Yet, here we were. The television murmured in the background, but it was inconsequential, nothing outside this moment held significance. My focus was solely on the warmth of his presence, the way his hand glided up my back, and the unwavering intensity of his gaze. He was not merely looking at me, he was truly seeing me, as he never had before. His fingers grazed my shoulders, his touch slow and intentional, as if every second of this encounter was significant. And somehow, I understood that it was. We were not contemplating what lay ahead, we were not questioning the morality of our actions. We were simply present, and nothing had ever felt more authentic. Each moment was charged with electricity, as if the universe had contracted to encompass just this room, this couch, and the two of us. I exhaled, tilting my head back, surrendering control to him. I should have resisted, I should have voiced something, anything, to remind us of the wrongness of this. But I remained silent, for deep down, I recognized that I did not wish to stop him. Ron's lips brushed against my collarbone, slow and deliberate, his breath warm against my skin, his hands pressing against my sides, gliding. He held me tightly, as if he needed to draw me closer, as though the space between us was insufficient, even when it was non-existent. I clenched my jaw, attempting to suppress the shiver that coursed through me. He must have sensed it, for he exhaled sharply, his fingers tightening around me. "We shouldn't be engaging in this," he said, his voice rough and strained, as if he were trying to persuade himself. I swallowed hard, my hands gripping his arms. "I understand, but neither of us made a move to distance ourselves." His forehead rested against mine, his breath unsteady. We were teetering on the brink of something perilous, something irreversible. One more step forward would render retreat impossible, and we both recognized it. Yet, when he kissed me again, slow, deep, and imbued with an indescribable emotion, I realized we had already succumbed. Ron's kiss was slower this time, deeper, as if he acknowledged that we had crossed the threshold of no return, that he had ceased to resist, just as I had. His hands explored my body, fingertips tracing the contours of my skin, discovering me in ways he never had before. Each touch ignited a surge of heat within me, every movement drawing me further into an experience I did not fully comprehend but never wished to end. I gasped as he pressed closer, his weight enveloping me. He was everywhere, his warmth, his scent, the sensation of him against me, surrounding and consuming me. My fingers curled into his back, clinging to him as if he were the only stable presence in a world that had been turned upside down, and perhaps he always had been. "Dominic," he murmured against my throat, his breath warm, his voice strained. Hearing my name spoken in that low, rough tone, filled with something raw and unexpressed, sent a shiver through me. I arched into him, my pulse racing against my ribs. Ron's lips traveled over my skin, his hands gripping me tighter, pulling me closer as if he feared I might slip away. But I wasn't going anywhere, I couldn't. I didn't want to. The world beyond this moment ceased to exist, it was solely him. This situation was perilous. It contradicted everything we had been taught to avoid desiring, yet it felt too pleasurable to halt, too right to relinquish. I was uncertain how long we remained entwined, lost in each other, ensnared in an indescribable connection. Time had become irrelevant. All I was aware of was the sensation of Ron's hands gliding over my skin, the way he caressed me as if he had been anticipating this moment far longer than either of us would acknowledge. His breathing was irregular, his grip both firm and gentle, as if he were attempting to memorize every contour of my being, and perhaps I was doing the same. I traced my hands along his back, sensing the tautness of his muscles, the way his body responded to each subtle movement. It was intoxicating, the dynamic between us, the unspoken yearning that neither of us had recognized until this moment. He leaned back slightly to meet my gaze, his dark eyes probing mine, silently inquiring if I felt fear. I did not. I looked up at him, my heart racing, urging him not to stop. A shift occurred in his expression, something deeper than mere desire, something more perilous. A smirk played at the corner of his lips as he declared, "Not a chance." In that instant, the intensity between us engulfed everything. The fire that ignited that night did not extinguish, it did not diminish with the alcohol, the ensuing silence, or even with the dawn's light filtering through the curtains, casting gentle shadows over our bare skin. Ron remained beside me, his warmth enveloping me, his breath steady, his arm draped casually over my waist. This was not merely a dream or a mistake, it was something tangible, something irreversible. I lay still, gazing at the ceiling, my chest rising and falling under the weight of reality, what we had done, what we had become. It was not just wrong, it was unattainable. Yet, I felt no regret. I turned my head slightly to observe him as he slept, looking serene and completely at ease, as if he were not burdened by the same heaviness in his chest that I bore. Or perhaps he was, but he concealed it better. My fingers twitched. The desire to trace the line of his jaw and run my fingers through his tousled hair was overwhelming, yet I held back. In the clarity of the morning light, I understood that this could not happen again, even if I wished it could. Every fiber of my being urged me to reach for him, to draw him back into the warmth we had shared just hours before. Ron stirred beside me, his eyes blinking open, dark and inscrutable, yet entirely focused on me. For a prolonged moment, silence enveloped us. Then he exhaled, shifting onto his side, his arm tightening around me just a fraction. "You're overthinking it," Ron murmured, his voice thick with sleep. I released a quiet breath, staring at the ceiling. "You're not." He paused, then smirked, though something in his expression softened, revealing a careful consideration. "What's there to think about?" I turned to face him fully, my throat constricted. "Ron, we can't." His voice remained steady, but his eyes flickered with unspoken emotions, something heavy lingering between us. For a fleeting moment, I sensed hesitation, perhaps even regret, or simply the awareness that things had irrevocably changed. Slowly, he reached out, his fingertips grazing my jaw, tracing my skin as if committing the moment to memory. His touch was gentle, a gesture that conveyed more than words ever could. I swallowed hard. We both recognized the truth, this could not endure, not in this reality. We were not merely two individuals, we were bound as brothers, not by blood but by a connection equally defining, rendering this impossible, despite how natural it felt. When our parents returned and life resumed its course, this night, this quiet, impossible, beautiful night would fade into nothing more than a memory, a secret neither of us would ever voice. Ron exhaled slowly, his fingers lingering for just a moment longer before withdrawing. "We should get up," he murmured, rolling onto his back, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. I nodded, yet neither of us moved. The silence stretched between us, fragile and uncertain, filled with unspoken thoughts. He eventually sat up, running his fingers through his hair. His demeanor shifted, becoming inscrutable, rehearsed, and detached. I followed suit moments later, the gap between us widening despite our physical proximity in the same room. By the time our parents returned home that evening, we had reverted to being just brothers. Yet, every glance, every silent moment, and every accidental brush of our hands carried an unspoken understanding between us. We both remembered, and regardless of the time that elapsed or the distance we attempted to create since that night, it would remain etched in our memories.